Hi, and welcome back to Rick's Room. I'm Rick Grant, and this is the show we made to kind of duplicate something that has happened to most of us in business over the years. But it started when I was a journalist years ago. Go to business conferences, but my favorite part was consistently the end of a long day, sitting in the lounge, and finally getting to talk to someone I'd been wanting to talk to all day, like this guest, all right, Mark Dangelo. Now, you've heard of him. He's an author, multiple books, 5 books now. He teaches at Case Western. He's a consultant and has been for years for companies, big companies that you know. He writes all the time for MBA Newslink. He writes for Reuters, the Data Foundation. And today, he's going to join us in the room. Mark, thanks for being here.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, we used to podcast together all the time, and then you got so busy doing about 50 things, having bunches of students follow you around and working on their projects, that now I'm lucky to get you, and I'm happy to have you with me today. So this show, super simple. If we were sitting together in comfy chairs at the end of a day at a busy conference, what would you talk to me about?
I think there's a couple of different topics on this, but let's start with the primary one that's in the hype and the headlines everywhere, which is artificial intelligence. AI, as people just kind of generically label that, it means many things to many different people. And if you look at how, for instance, go to a conference, go to read a book, pick up an article, you look at how people are actually doing things, they still believe that artificial intelligence, if I fix one component, the idea of keep it simple, stupid, it's the old KISS principle that if I did one thing and tweaked it as a consultant or as an advisor or as an industry leader, that's going to improve my efficiency. AI has changed that dynamic. And if you look at the last few years, I think this is why AI typically only about less than 10%, some people would say less than 5% of the AI projects that are in corporations actually get out of the lab, get out of the pilot stage. They can't scale, they can't be sustained. And that's because we only focused on one thing. AI focuses business leaders, for instance, to look at their strategy, to look at their data architecture, to look at their technical debt that sits there from the legacy systems. If you look at this, the people that go with it, the processes, if we tackle one thing at one time, the problem with AI is not serial, it's parallel. And so when you start to have these parallel systems, the challenge is where do you begin and where do you end? We have not developed our frameworks, our methodologies, our system development kits until the last couple of years to deal with this concept. And I think that's why things don't scale. That's why these wonderful dreams of AI have not come to fruition and really haven't benefited the bottom line.
Yeah, yeah. Now it feels like your laptop's on your lap because it's bouncing on me a little
Oh,
bit.
sorry, that's probably just me. It's the proverbial foot tapping. Come on.
Now, I love listening to you talk about AI, Mark, because when was it? 2018, you wrote the book where you actually had a discussion with an AI entity before anybody was actually doing that. Now we've got kids in high school
Right.
talking to AI the same way as you wrote in the book. So you've seen it come from zero to where it is today. Where's it going from here? How are you going to solve some of the problems you just mentioned?
Well, a couple of different things. I think the book you refer to is the ramifications of innovation singularity, which is where we as humans begin to bond with our technology. And we've seen this over and over. The challenge is, or the reality is that we can actually now begin to embed tech into the human body over and over in different things. We can use the AI tech to leverage our experience, kind of the human in the loop. We can have AI do the mundane things or bring things together that we couldn't bring together before because they were too complex, too uh, analytical, too whatever. The challenge is how do you do this all at the same time? And that was the whole purpose of the book, to basically say, 8 years back, that if we look at where humans are going to look at the tech, we have to be able to tackle multiple things at multiple times concurrently. And so part of the challenge here is even from the university standpoint, and you mentioned that, yes, I teach over at Case Western Reserve University. Again, I'm an industry person, so I come from a non-academic, non-research, where those organizations are very much focused on trying to do one thing, research, whether people use it or not. because it's research that was, at that time, it was government funded. They could do this for years at a time. In the industry, we have to deal with results. And so AI is definitely about results. So we have to change the way we not only think about AI, but the way we educate students for AI. I've been a computer scientist over 40 years. I've spent my career doing this. This isn't something I came into. Um, this is something I've done. And when you look at what is happening on the markets, you look at what your industry and your leadership is going to have to change, you have to look at this holistically before you go down into the granularity.
Well, thank goodness you're in there, Mark, because you've been talking to me about that kind of thing for a long time, about getting the data all together, getting all of the
Correct.
systems connected, making sure you've got high data quality before it goes into your systems. And now I guess that's more important than it's ever been because AI can't really function well with garbage going in, right? So,
Well, it's the challenge of AI is that it's become so common. People talk about it like it's air. The reality is that what's an LLM? Well, there are probably hundreds of different LLMs. There are LLMs, large language models, that are unique for industries. Are they small language models now? Is it general AI? Is it general AI with retrieval augmented generation? Is it agentic AI, which is decision components? Is it agentic AI with RAG, which is the retrieval augmented generation? Each of these all means different types of fuel feeding into those AI engines. And so we can tweak the AI engines all we want. More than likely, the failures of AI haven't really been necessarily about the algorithms being wrong or the capabilities. It's the fuel that we're feeding it, the interconnectivity that we need to deal with this. That brings the concepts of things like data meshes, data fabrics, data weaves, advanced data architectures that are already in industry, but we're now applying them to very complex AI systems. And again, you've got to start to wrap your mind around some of this stuff where it's not the KISS concept. This is multi-complex, multimodal. This is not for the faint of heart. And I think when we look at how we approach it as industry, we teach our students in higher education, data scientists, computer scientists, business information professionals, we often just focus on one singular piece. And the reality is that you have got many pieces. This is a mosaic. And so if you can't think in a mosaic in an AI world, you're always going to be at that tail end of productivity, of technical debt and so forth.
yeah, yeah. Now, as you know, I've been a technology reporter for years. You've been a CTO for a major company in the space that I reported on.
Mm-hmm.
This has always been a bit of a problem, though, breaking down corporate silos. And we've had big enterprise software systems that promised to do that for corporations and failed. Is
Correct.
AI what's finally going to push us to that kind of fully interconnected corporate enterprise? And how long will it take?
The timing is always the challenge because that depends on the organization, the leadership, the culture, and the industry. There are some very unique variables there. However, if you look at the progression since really 2000, the idea of data standards, we've seen this in retail banking, we've seen this in mortgage banking, we've seen this in healthcare, the list goes on, is that the idea of data standards has helped facilitate this integration aspect that we need to have happen. The challenge is, and this is a key differential, is that if we continue to approach AI from what we call a system ideation, basically looking at it from an application perspective, I got to fix this process, or I got to do this from a competitive product standpoint or a service standpoint. If I look at it singularly from those unique vantage points, yeah, I can fix that problem. I can get rid of it. I can use the technology to make that happen. The problem is I don't do anything about the corporate data. And so this is where people always want to say, well, I'm going to fix data. I'm going to do data cleansing. I'm going to do a data assessment. I know we have 70 different date formats, or I'm in a pharmaceutical and I have 7 different concepts of what an assay is or a test for a pharmaceutical to do the FDA submission. All those things are great, but you've got to get the data consistent to do that. The data standards help that, but now the data technologies have gotten so much more advanced. Think about it this way. A couple of years ago, we used to talk, and when we talked about a industry or corporation, let's say like JP Morgan, their technology data centers used to be measured in terabytes or hundreds of terabytes. That's a 10 to the 12 power type of thing. Today, we measure data in systems through all the devices, everything else we have, into hundreds of 10 to the 21 power of data. And that is doubling every 2 years at a 2.5 rate. So you look at this, that's a zettabyte versus a terabyte, by the way. So when you look at this, the ability to integrate all this is what AI is great at. You've got the language models, you've got the RAG, retrieval augmented generation. But that only works when all these things are talking consistently. Otherwise, AI is going to continue to produce hallucinations. They're going to produce wrong results. The research we do isn't going to be useful. It goes back to the core of the data that feeds these from the tech. And that's what I think has to change, is that we can't just piecemeal these together. The tech is there. You look at retrieval augmented generation, like I said, but then you start thinking about the chips from like NVIDIA or Intel, the GPUs, the PUs, all that other stuff that's out there. The latest NVIDIA chip, for instance, can process in 1 second what we used to take a human roughly a million years to do per second. You're talking the transaction. So, I mean, these things are hugely complex and powerful. The problem is our whole design of how we brought this data together, how we brought these systems together, is something in that system ideation, not a data ideation. And that's the challenge.
Yeah. So as you're talking, I'm thinking, and first I'm thinking, well,
You're
this
like,
is
holy
way,
crap, this is
yeah,
complex.
well, nobody's going to get this done except maybe the biggest companies. But then you say something about the problems with the data, and now I'm thinking the big companies might be at a real disadvantage compared to the smaller
Oftentimes they
companies.
are. The
Yeah.
beauty is, though, that with AI is now going from a coding aspect to a low code, no code, just like we saw with some of the other tech back in the cloud days, 10, 15 years ago. So the ability to bring this together is getting simpler. What we could and could not do just 5 months ago went from a coding exercise to a no code exercise. We can actually put these building blocks together. So the why this is very complex. The beauty is AI vendors, AI providers, people that are in the know are actually creating these building blocks for everybody to use. And some of them are proprietary, some are open source. But again, it requires more thinking than the original KISS concept, the original information engineering or system ideation approach. You have to change your thinking to be able to really leverage and sustain AI. And think about it. 3 years ago, 2023, and it's 2022 now. It was Gen AI was all the rage. Well, Gen AI is kind of going passive. We're now talking, 2 iterations beyond that. We went through RAG, we went into agentic AI, and now they're talking agentic RAG. So now we're like in the 4th iteration of this within 3 years. And that's the challenge, is that if organizations think that this is going to be at the same pace, the same urgency, the same mindset of how we develop and deploy systems, I think they're going to fail miserably.
Yeah, well, that seems to be the typical path with any technology. There's a lot of failures on the bleeding edge, and then you get to the leading edge, and some people get it right. If you had to leave us with one thing about what one of the keys to actually getting it right is going to be, what would you say?
There are probably two. One is change your process, focus on data versus systems only. Systems come after the data. So if your data is consistent, your systems are going to be a heck of a lot easier. Think of it like weaving a fabric together for your shirt or your sweatshirt. It's a bunch of threads, but if I don't put them together correctly, it's going to fall apart in the wash. And so that's really what happens here. The second one is that you need to change how the systems are governed. The data is governed. It's not just an IT process. This is not Field of Dreams where I build it and everybody comes and I spend lots of money. This is not a money sucking exercise of the IT age. This is quick hits. These are 30, 60, 90 days, 2 weeks. These are very, very focused solutions that are building blocks. And so it's a crawl, walk, run engineering process where I don't need to have millions upon millions or come into the big consulting and pay them $10 million to develop my strategy. Nope. and take 3 years. We need to do this quickly. You need to react to the markets because the markets are changing that quickly under you. So those are
Well,
the two things you got to do.
yeah, and that's kind of exciting because those sound doable for a lot of companies, especially if they get the right help and the right guidance.
Think about it. The last point I'll give you is think about this if you are a small and medium vendor competing against the big folk, right? If I couldn't do this a couple years ago, now the competitive landscape has completely changed. I can rewrite my future. I can, if I incorporate these things, I can actually be more competitive in these larger organizations and adapt much quicker. And that's the beauty is I don't have to spend all this money to figure out the adoption cycle. No, I'll let somebody else do that. I'll create the Legos, all different colors. I can assemble them and I can make a Star Wars, whatever. But now I can begin to say, oh, I can bring these together and it's open source, or I can mix open source with proprietary. And guess what? It doesn't take me 3 years and tens of millions of dollars. I can take and eat their lunch and then charge them for it as well.
Well, Mark, you left me in the place you leave me every time we speak, which is
Laughing?
I can't wait to see what you do next. I can't wait. If you guys want to follow Mark, we're going to put some information in the show notes. You'll be able to do it too. And Mark, I'm just telling you right now, I'm going to have you back. We're going to have to talk again, right?
I appreciate it. Hopefully, like I said, it's for people to look at this and the first time they hear it, they think, oh my God, what's he talking about? The reality is this is the same stuff we've been talking about for a while. We couldn't do it. When I wrote the Innovation and Singularity back in 2018, tech wasn't there.
Right.
8 years, that tech has completely changed.
Yeah.
I can put smart tattoos on me now that can record my body's thing that are generated from the electricity in my body.
Oh.
Come on, I can track all this information. So, and that's just something very simple. I can have it embedded under the skin. I can hack my genome. You look at this and say, if I can do that with a complex being like a human, as we call, what could I do when I start to bring all this tech together if I just change a couple of degrees how I approach those systems? So that's where the future will be talking about, I'm sure.
Mark Dangelo, folks, he's with me in Rick's room. Mark, I'm going to have you here again too. Thank you so much for your time today.
Appreciate it. Take care.
We'll talk soon.